My father did not waste time with pleasantries. He simply said, "I know you helped with the bills, Ashley, but we are gifting the boatyard title to Jacob for his graduation. It is his legacy now." I gripped the phone, waiting for the punchline. It came a second later. "And you are not invited to the party. We want a celebration, not a reminder of the bad times." The line went dead. I stared at the calendar on my wall where I had circled today's date in red ink. Final payment cleared. He thought he was cutting me out of the family. He had no idea he was trespassing on my property. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. To understand why I held the match, you have to understand the pile of kindling I had been building for 4 years. It started in a humid office in Savannah with the air conditioner rattling against the silence. My father Robert was staring at a ledger that bled red ink. The historic boatyard, the family jewel since 1950, was drowning under $850,000 of toxic debt. He was too proud to declare bankruptcy, and my mother Susan was too passive to demand a plan. They were just going to let the water rise until it swallowed them. I was 25. I had a logistics degree, a good job, and a desperate, pathetic need to be the hero. I sat across from them and made an offer that should have come with a warning label. I told them I would handle it. I did not say I would help. I said I would fix it. My father did not cry. He did not hug me. He just nodded as if my financial ruin was the expected cost of doing business. For the next 48 months, I ceased to be a person and became a payment processor. I moved out of my nice apartment and into a 300-square-foot studio above a garage that smelled perpetually of gasoline and mildew. I stopped going out on Friday nights. I stopped dating. While my friends posted photos from Tulum and Paris, I was sitting on a second-hand mattress calculating the interest on a business loan for a company I did not run. I ate rice and beans until the taste made me gag. I wore my work clothes until the hems frayed. Every spare cent, every bonus, every tax refund went directly into the wire transfer. $850,000. It sounds like a number, but it felt like a hemorrhage. You might ask why a smart woman would set herself on fire to keep others warm. I used to tell myself it was loyalty. I used to tell myself it was duty. But looking back, I know what it really was. It was the trap of normalized cruelty. Psychologists call it intermittent reinforcement. It is the same mechanism that keeps people addicted to slot machines. You do not play because you win every time. You play because you win just often enough to believe the next pull will be the jackpot. My parents had trained me well. If I was quiet, I was ignored. If I was needy, I was a burden. But if I was useful, if I was the one writing the check, then for a fleeting moment I was seen. My father would clap me on the shoulder and say, "Good girl." My mother would smile with relief. Those crumbs of affection were my jackpot. I poured nearly $1 million into that slot machine, convinced that if I just invested enough, the payout would be a family that actually loved me. I was not paying a mortgage. I was paying a subscription fee for their approval. I thought I was buying security, a legacy, a seat at the table. I did not realize that to them I was not a partner. I was just the help. And you do not invite the help to the celebration once the work is done. I did not turn my car around to beg for an invitation. I did not drive to my parents' house to scream or throw a tantrum on the front lawn. That is what a daughter does. I was no longer operating as a daughter. I was operating as a creditor. I drove straight to the glass-walled office building downtown where my Uncle James practiced corporate law. James was the silent partner in this entire tragedy. He was the one who had watched my father run the business into the ground with a mixture of pity and frustration. He was the one who had pulled me aside 4 years ago when I was ready to sign the first check and told me, "Ashley, do not be a martyr, be an investor." I walked into his office without an appointment. He looked up from his desk, saw the set of my jaw, and simply closed his laptop. "They tried to cut you out," he stated. It was not a question. "They are gifting the property to Jacob on Saturday," I said. "They think they own it." James stood up and walked to the safe in the corner. He dialed in the combination, the mechanical clicks sounding like the chambers of a gun being loaded. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound binder labeled Safe Harbor Trust. He slid it across the mahogany desk toward me. "Then it is time to remind them how to read," he said. We opened the binder. Inside were the documents my parents had signed 4 years ago. They thought they were signing standard loan agreements, a formality to let their nice, helpful daughter pay their bills. They thought the Safe Harbor Trust was just a fancy name to keep the taxman away. They were wrong. My father had signed those papers without reading a single paragraph. His arrogance was so absolute, so blinding, that he never imagined his compliant daughter would have the audacity to protect herself. He assumed I was writing a check. I was actually writing a contract. Page 4, Section B, James pointed out his finger, tracing the line. Structured equity buyout. I read the words I already knew by heart. Every payment I had made was not a gift. It was a purchase of equity. The agreement stipulated that if the original owners failed to repay the principal within 48 months, which they had the controlling interest in the land, the structures and the business license reverted entirely to the primary investor. Me. Legally, I had not just saved the house. I had bought the company out from under them. I owned the dirt they walked on. I owned the roof over their heads. I owned the very gate they planned to hang balloons on. Technically, James said, his voice devoid of emotion, Robert and Susan have been tenants for the last 30 days. Tenants who are attempting to gift a landlord's property to a third party. Draft the eviction notice, I said, and the cease and desist for the title transfer. James looked at me. He did not smile, but there was a glint of respect in his eyes. He saw the shift. The girl who wanted to be loved was gone. The woman who wanted her return on investment had taken her place. Do you want me to mail these? He asked. No, I said, closing the binder. I will deliver them myself. I drove past the boatyard later that afternoon. I did not stop. I did not slow down. I simply observed the crime scene from the safety of my sedan. The property was transformed. White tents peeked over the perimeter fence like shark fins. Caterers were unloading crates of champagne and seafood. And there, sitting on the main lift, was the centerpiece of the betrayal. It was a 28-foot center console, gleaming white with teak accents wrapped in a massive red bow. A gift for the graduate. Jacob had never sanded a hull in his life. He had never scraped barnacles until his knuckles bled. He had spent 6 years getting a 2-year MBA partying on my father's dime while I paid the electric bill, and now he was getting a boat worth more than my annual salary as a reward for existing. My phone buzzed against the passenger seat. It was a text from Jacob. Dad says you are ruining my vibe. Stay away tomorrow. We do not need your negativity. I looked at the message and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sting. Just the cold recognition of a bad investment. My father had posted a photo of himself standing next to the new boat, one hand resting possessively on the hull. The caption read, "It took blood, sweat, and tears to save this place, but handing it over to my son makes every sacrifice worth it. The legacy is safe." Blood, sweat, and tears. He was right about the ingredients, but he had the wrong donor. He was claiming my hemorrhage as his own vitality. For years, I had asked myself the question that haunts every scapegoat. Why him? Why was Jacob the prince when I was the one keeping the castle standing? Looking at that photo, the answer finally clicked into place. It wasn't about love. It was about ego. Sociologists call it the golden child delusion or narcissistic extension. My father did not look at Jacob and see a person. He looked at Jacob and saw a mirror that reflected the version of himself he wanted to be: young, wealthy, carefree, unburdened by consequences. Jacob was the fantasy. He was the avatar of the legacy my father pretended to have. And me, I was the reality check. I was the one who talked about budgets, overdue notices, and lean months. I was the mirror that showed him his failures. Every time I paid a bill, I was silently proving that he couldn't. I made him feel small because I was the one holding him up. He hated me for my strength because it highlighted his weakness. They were erasing me because I was the evidence of their fraud. To keep their shared delusion alive, the witness had to disappear. I put the phone down. The last thread of guilt snapped. I had spent 4 years trying to buy my way into a family that only had room for fans, not partners. I shifted the car into gear and drove away from the tents, the boat, and the lie. Saturday arrived with a sky so blue it looked expensive. The boatyard was humming with the low murmur of guests who believed they were attending a coronation. From the tinted window of my car parked just outside the perimeter, I watched them file in. I checked my watch. 2 in the afternoon. The golden hour. "Ready?" Miss the man in the passenger seat asked. He was a locksmith named Earl, a man with calloused hands and zero interest in family drama. Behind us in a marked cruiser, Deputy Miller was finishing his coffee. "Let's go," I said. We did not use the front entrance where the balloons were tied. We went to the main commercial gate, the heavy rolling steel barrier that controlled access to the dry docks, and the lift where Jacob's new boat was sitting pretty. Earl worked quickly. He didn't just change the lock. He wrapped a heavy-duty hardened steel chain through the bars and secured it with a padlock the size of a fist. The snap of that lock clicking shut was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a vault closing. It was the sound of a boundary finally becoming physical. That boat wasn't going anywhere, neither was their delusion. I signaled Deputy Miller. He stepped out of his car, adjusting his belt. The gravel crunched under my heels, a steady rhythmic march that cut through the soft jazz playing over the speakers. My father was standing on a raised platform, a microphone in his hand, a glass of sparkling wine raised high. He looked the part of the patriarch, perfectly tan, confident, benevolent. Jacob stood beside him, beaming, looking at the crowd like they were his subjects. And that is why my father boomed, his voice amplified across the lawn. It is my honor to hand the keys of this kingdom to the man who will carry the Dawson legacy into the future. To my son Jacob. The crowd applauded. My mother wiped a tear. It was a beautiful scene. It was a complete fiction. I stepped onto the grass. I wouldn't accept those keys if I were you, Jacob, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The sight of a uniformed sheriff's deputy walking through a garden party tends to suck the air out of a room. The applause died instantly. The jazz band stopped playing. My father froze his glass halfway to his mouth. When he saw me, his face twisted into a mask of pure fury. Ashley, he hissed into the microphone, forgetting to lower it. I told you. You are not welcome here. Get out before I have you removed. You can't remove the owner, Robert, I said, using his first name. It felt like a slap. I walked up to the platform, ignoring the gasps from my aunts and uncles. I didn't look at them. I looked only at him. You are trespassing, I said, calm, factual, lethal, and you are attempting to gift assets that do not belong to you. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick envelope Uncle James had prepared. I slapped it onto the podium right next to his champagne glass. Cease and desist on the title transfer I listed, pointing to the documents, notice of default on the business loans, and an eviction notice for the residential property. You're insane, my father sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. You bankrupted it, I corrected. I bought it. 4 years ago. Every check I wrote bought a piece of this ground until there was nothing left of your share. You signed the deal, Dad. You just didn't bother to read it. I turned to the sheriff. Deputy, these individuals are holding an unauthorized event on private commercial property. I would like them dispersed. My father did not go quietly. He lunged for the chain on the gate, rattling the heavy steel links until his knuckles turned white. He screamed about his rights, about his sweat equity, about the sheer ungratefulness of a daughter who would steal a man's life work. It was a tantrum pure and simple. I watched him with the detached interest of an auditor reviewing a non-compliant file. The documents are legal, Robert, I said, my voice cutting through his shouting, and since you seem to have forgotten the terms, I brought a reminder. I pulled my phone from my pocket and connected it to the Bluetooth speaker system on the podium. I pressed play. A voice filled the tent, tinny but unmistakable. It was my father 4 years ago, sitting in Uncle James's office. I do not care what the fine print says, James. Just get the bills paid so I can go fishing. If Ashley wants to play boss, let her. We all know who really runs this place. The silence in the tent was absolute. They heard the sound of a man signing away his empire because he was too lazy to read the terms. My father's face drained of color. He looked at the speaker, then at me, realizing for the first time that I had kept receipts for everything. Not just the money, but the disrespect. Deputy Miller stepped forward. Mr. Henderson, he said, his voice calm but firm. I have reviewed the title and the current deed. This property belongs to Ashley Henderson. You have been served with a cease and desist. At this point, your presence here constitutes criminal trespass. I am going to have to ask you to vacate the premises. Then Jacob stepped up. My brother, the MBA graduate, the golden child. He looked from our father to me, his face flushing with indignation. You can't do this, he shouted, his voice cracking. This is my legacy, Dad promised it to me. It is not a legacy, Jacob, I said, turning to him. It is a liability. Do you even know what the operating costs are? Do you know how much the insurance runs? Do you know that the hull repair permit expires next month? He stared at me blankly. Of course he didn't. He thought ownership was just standing on a boat and looking important. I didn't steal your gift, I told him. I saved you from bankruptcy. You have an MBA. Do the math. You cannot inherit an asset that was liquidated 4 years ago. My mother, Susan, finally spoke. She walked over to me, her eyes wet with tears. Ashley, please, she whispered, loud enough for the front row to hear. We are family. We can work this out. Don't do this to your brother, be reasonable. It was the same plea she had used for 20 years. Be reasonable. Translation: be silent, be the cushion that absorbs the impact so the men don't have to break. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I felt nothing. No guilt, no obligation, just the clarity of a final transaction. I am following the contract you signed. I am protecting my investment, and I am evicting you. I turned to the crowd. Thank you all for coming. This event is cancelled. Please clear the area so we can lock the gates. The aftermath was not a negotiation, it was a liquidation. Robert and Susan had 30 days to vacate the historic home on the property. They moved into a 2-bedroom condo 3 towns over, a place with beige walls and no water view. Jacob, stripped of his unearned executive title, had to apply for entry-level jobs where his last name meant nothing. I stood on the dock of the boatyard one last time a week after the party. The tents were gone. The gift boat had been repossessed by the bank when I revealed the company funds used to lease it were unauthorized. It was just me, the salt air, and the quiet. People asked if I was going to keep it. They asked if I was going to move into the big house and run the empire I had conquered, but that would have been a mistake. Keeping the yard would have meant building a shrine to my own trauma. It would have meant living inside the ghost of their rejection. So I engaged the justice of the sower. I did not just burn the field, I replanted it. I sold the land to a marine research collective for a sum that cleared every cent of debt and left a healthy surplus. I used the profit to seed my own logistics firm in Charleston, 2 hours away. A business built on my name, my credit, and my sweat. I opened my laptop one final time. I pulled up the spreadsheet titled Family Debts, the one where I had tracked every dollar, every insult, every moment of neglect. I did not archive it. I highlighted the columns and hit delete. The screen went white. It was the cleanest thing I had ever seen. I blocked their numbers. I changed my email. I got in my car and drove north, watching the Savannah marshlands fade in the rearview mirror. I left them with their stories, their excuses, and their blame. I took the only thing that mattered, my future. If you have ever had to burn a bridge to save yourself, share this story. You are not alone.